It's interesting to contemplate how much different the world might look today if we had a functioning news media here in the United States, as opposed to what we do have, which is an industry that seems to be equal parts a transcription service for the ruling elite class and a propaganda clearinghouse for the Chinese Communist Party. If we had a functioning news media, the changes would start right at the top. Joe Biden would not be in the White House unless it was as part of a tour group from his nursing home. He wouldn't have even been the Democrat nominee in 2020 if we had news media that were populated by people who are interested in doing journalism, because right from the day of his announcement in the summer of 2019, when the Biden family propped Grandpa's semi-animated corpse up in front of the cameras and assured everyone, well, sure, yeah, of course he wants to run. Look at him, he can't wait. Doesn't he look excited? Tell the nice people how excited you are to run for president, Grandpa. And even though he might look like a guy who's in an advanced state of feebleness, a guy who probably shouldn't be feeding and dressing himself at this point, we, the Biden family, are totally not putting him up to this. Just because we want one more chance to criminally enrich ourselves at the expense of some of the world's poorest and most oppressed peoples. Because we would never do that. You have our word as Bidens. And you may recall another thing that happened right around the time of Joe's big announcement that he was going to be seeking the presidency for the 57th time, I believe. Robert Gates, former defense secretary under both Bush and Obama, a guy widely regarded as honorable and competent with no particular partisan axe to grind, he went on TV that same night. And when he was asked for his assessment of Joe Biden's fitness to become the commander-in-chief and de facto leader of the free world, he said, very matter-of-factly, Joe Biden has been wrong on every foreign policy question of the last 40 years. And nobody argued with him because he wasn't wrong. If anything, he probably gave Joe too much credit. Because it's really more on the order of 50 years that he's spent being wrong about everything, because one of Biden's first acts upon becoming a fresh-faced, already balding 30-year-old freshman senator in 1973 was to be completely wrong about how best to handle the threats that OPEC was making about an oil embargo. And speaking of oil, black gold, Texas tea, bubbling crude, if you're old enough to remember 13 and a half months ago, you may recall President Joe Biden assuming office on a day when the United States of America was both energy self-sufficient and the number one world exporter of energy. And you may also recall that by the time you went to bed that night, both of those things were no longer true. Joe Biden spent a lot of decades as senator and vice president alike paying lip service to the idea of an energy-independent United States. Oh, wouldn't that be great? Imagine that we wouldn't have to have troops in the Middle East, we wouldn't have to be involved in other people's affairs, and nothing that happened in any foreign country could affect your gasoline prices or your electric bill. But then that is the difference between our last two presidents, isn't it? Joe Biden will talk about doing a thing for 40 or 50 years, and Donald Trump just does the thing. Joe Biden feigns concern for the plight of everyday people. Donald Trump takes tangible actions to improve their condition. Joe Biden bloviates about how nice American energy independence would be, and then, when Donald Trump hands him an energy independent America, his first order of business on his first day is to reinstitute our dependence on foreign oil, and with it all the pointless geopolitical entanglements it entails. Now, irrespective of anything YouTube says, I have never claimed or even intimated that Joe Biden gained the presidency due to a preponderance of fraudulent votes, and I don't think it matters all that much anyway. The number one reason we have this crusty cadaver for our president right now is because lots of dumbass people got duped into voting for him. So instead of turning our ire against the dead voters, how about let's focus on the living ones instead? Moreover, the best way to avoid getting an election stolen always has been, always will be, is by making sure the damn thing is not close enough to steal. This one was close enough to steal, which it never should have been. So whether it actually got stolen is something of a moot point for me, really. And besides, when we talk about stealing an election, why should we only be talking about out-and-out fraudulent vote casting? Would that even be the worst thing that happened in the 2020 election? Is it worse than a professional journalist class that drops all pretense of professional decorum and ethical rigor in order to make sure its preferred candidate is duly installed in the presidency? Is it worse than a billionaire industrialist oligarch class that wields the banhammer of mass censorship to make stories disappear that might reflect unfavorably on the guy that they've decided to install at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? And well, there's the whole opening segment gone, and we haven't even mentioned Putin yet. I guess I have now. Shit. Never mind. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where the Genocide Olympics involve actual genocide and are held each time our enemy's population recovers sufficiently to hold the games. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And you might want to start your screen recorders right now, because since I am a firm believer in giving credit where credit is due, and I think Joe Biden deserves credit, or at least his handlers do, for turning this Ukraine-Russia thing into a win-win proposition for him, potentially, politically speaking, which would definitely be a first in this administration, where most times it seems like they're setting up their boss to either step on a rake or get hit in the face with a shovel, or occasionally both at the same time. They didn't get their preferred outcome, which would have been for Joe to fly over there, probably with a briefcase full of cash, and meet with Putin in some meaningless bit of political stagecraft. And then when no Russian military incursion was forthcoming, probably because Joe paid them off not to do it, he could stand up there and mutter unintelligibly about what a master of sophisticated international diplomatic brinkmanship he is. That was what the preferred outcome was. All of this is about rehabilitating Joe Biden politically and making him into less of an albatross around his party's neck going into the midterms in November. And you can't politically rehabilitate Joe Biden all at once, because let's face it, this guy's had 42 years in the Senate, 8 years in the vice presidency, in which to establish himself firmly as a bumbling buffoon of the first order. And now on top of that, he's got the most disastrous first-year track record of any president in history. And the worst blunder of them all was the embarrassing, shambolic manner in which we were turned out of Afghanistan by a bunch of 8th century goat fornicators. In terms of things that had an immediate and extremely negative effect on Joe Biden's approval numbers, Afghanistan was the thing that caused lots of people in the country to start saying, yeah, all right, I've seen enough. Honeymoon's over. This guy's an idiot. Doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. My mind's made up. Up until Afghanistan, even with the wide variety of other things he had bungled up to that point, he still was solidly in the 48 to 50% approval range, which is rather low historically for the first 6 months, but it's not catastrophic. You can flip that number just by having a strong 10 days or 2 weeks, but Afghanistan took us right out of that territory and into the territory of, we got to stop the bleeding somehow, or else we're going to lose the patient. After Afghanistan, after that once-in-a-lifetime humiliation and the loss of national prestige that accompanied it, his positive numbers have been nearly cut in half. His negative numbers have more than doubled, and none of the distracting, shiny objects they've tried since then have succeeded, either in ameliorating or reversing the trend. It's not overstating matters to say the only reassuring thing about Joe Biden's poll numbers is that they're still not quite as abysmal as Kamala Harris's poll numbers. But make no mistake, and be under no illusion about what the purpose is and has been of this sudden dramatic pivot to being obsessed over Russia and Ukraine. The goal of this exercise, from the point of view of Biden's handlers and of the media Democrat complex more broadly, was to be able to craft a narrative out of it whereby Joe Biden could be portrayed as a cunning diplomat, a genius-level 4D chess player on the world stage who extricated everyone from the horror of a border skirmish between two former Soviet republics. But if it played out just right, so the thinking went, it would make everybody forget the embarrassment of the botched exit from Afghanistan and the $85 billion worth of equipment left behind and the family of 10 that we drone murdered on our way out the door just for good measure. And this would be just the thing to arrest the slide in Joe's poll numbers. Now, obviously, this preferred outcome has not come to pass. The Russian incursions have been made. Everybody is laughing at Joe for being such a weak, doddering old fool. So clearly, Operation Save Joe's approval rating has crashed and burned, right? Well, yes and no. Because like I said, this time for once, Joe's people have created a political equation for him that isn't quite all the way win-lose. To begin with, there was never all that much upside here, even if the thing had played out just the way they wanted. The best case scenario was going to be a minor diplomatic win that would hopefully wash the taste of Afghanistan out of the public's mouth. And the worst case scenario, I think we saw them rolling out that plan today. Because didn't it seem sort of strange today when Joe was standing up there muttering even more unintelligibly than normal, and he opens right up with, "Yep, your energy costs are about to go up. Sorry about it." Before he continued with, it was one of those days, frankly, when I half expected the sign language interpreter lady to flip him the stone cold salute and just walk right off the job. You wouldn't normally expect the president to lead off an address with something like that, with prices are going to go up, times are about to get tougher, but he and his people think they have a great opportunity here to take the bad results of their shitty policies and make them all the fault of Vladimir Putin, who, in case you haven't heard by now, is the wellspring of all evil in the universe, him and Donald Trump. Now, if you're a reasonable person with a functioning brain in your head, you might say, wait a minute, haven't gas prices been skyrocketing ever since this guy took office, and isn't it all because of his crappy policies? The answers to which, of course, are yes and yes. But much of politics is simply the art of finding yourself the right scapegoat. So that's why, all of a sudden, in a stark reversal from the pattern of his administration up to this point, Joe is now standing up there volunteering right up front, matter-of-factly, that, yep, your energy costs, they're about to skyrocket right across the board. And you know who did it to you? No, it wasn't me. It wasn't good old Scranton Joe. Vladimir Putin did this to you. And damn it, my administration will not rest until Vladimir Putin has been held accountable for this assault on the pocketbook of the U.S. taxpayer that he, Vladimir Putin, is solely responsible for. You see, the two biggest own goals for Joe Biden's administration thus far have been Afghanistan and energy policy. The American people are consistent about certain things. We don't like being embarrassed by 8th century goat fuckers, and we don't like paying $6 for a goddamn gallon of gasoline. Joe's handlers felt like they could fashion this Russia-Ukraine thing into a deal where no matter which way it went, they could scratch one or the other of those own goals off the board, either the Afghanistan thing or the energy policy thing. But even still, it's a course they never could have contemplated if we had a functioning news media. How many times in all the 13 months of press briefings with Lady Ginger McFirebush of Alabaster Farms have you heard anyone ask her why Joe Biden gave back our energy independence? In a world where journalists exist and are animated by the core principles of good journalism? Shouldn't that have been the first question at the first briefing on the first day? But here we are on 23 February of the second year, and we still await that question being asked. Though we probably shouldn't hold our breath. Now, remember that day back in December when they made a big show about how they were releasing a few million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve? And that was going to have a magical calming effect on the price of gasoline. It was the number one topic of discussion in that day's White House press briefing. And did any of the intrepid professional journalists in the room think to stand up and ask, if the administration's position is that it's desirable for the price of gas to go down, then why, since the moment they entered power, have they been deliberately pursuing policies that can only make it go up? Energy independence never used to be a controversial thing. Everybody agreed on a widely bipartisan basis that energy independence is something we want. So in a country with a functioning news media, wouldn't it be a fairly big scandal if the outgoing president had delivered energy independence? This thing everybody had agreed on since time immemorial that they all wanted? And the incoming president, literally with his first act on his first day in office, reversed the policies that had brought that about? Wouldn't that be a good time for professional journalists to ask, What benefit are the American people gaining by you guys intentionally giving back their energy independence? And, come to think of it, if we had a functioning news media, there are lots of questions that one could ask along those same lines. For example, what benefit are the American people gaining from your administration allowing 2 million foreign nationals to ingress our borders in contravention of our laws just last year? Or what benefit are the American people gaining from these last 2+ years spent living in a biosecurity police state? Or what benefit are the American people gaining from our kids having obedience muzzles strapped across their faces in school every day? Or we could go on. What benefit are the American people gaining from the explosion in violent crime that's been brought about by the preferred policies of the Democrat Party? What benefit are the American people gaining from their neighborhood parks being turned into public drug dens and open-air latrines? There are a cornucopia of questions like those. Pertinent questions, pressing questions, questions the answers to which countless millions of Americans would love to know, and are damn well entitled to know, but which the ostensibly professional journalists in the White House press corps steadfastly refuse, even after 13 months, to ask. But then, they can't ask hard questions of this administration, really, can they? After all, they own this guy. This is the guy they all sold their souls and their professional integrity to drag across the finish line. This man, this tragically unfit, dissipated, confused, withered husk of a man, is the man they installed in this position because getting rid of Trump was just that important. So important, nothing else mattered. So of course they're not going to ask him hard questions. Once they start asking hard questions, once they start alluding even obliquely to the fact that this is a disastrously failed administration and being led by a comically inept president, those same difficult questions will inevitably redound back upon them. And that's exactly why it's a bad idea to make moral compromises and devil's bargains, isn't it? Especially if one wishes to retain the option of coming to one's senses and acting like a news reporter. Because every question about Biden's unfitness and his incompetence and his track record can just as well be answered with, I don't know, Mr. Journalist. Why don't you tell me? You followed this guy around every day for over a year. You never saw that he was tired and cranky and confused and quite obviously in a fairly advanced state of senescence? Because of course you did. And you chose to say nothing. You decided it's better to go along to get along. You decided, nah, I better not ask any uncomfortable questions or I might lose my access when this guy gets in the White House. And then what will the point of this whole thing, bending over backward to put him in there, have been? And now, Mr. Fancy Journalist and his buddies, they want you and me to clutch our pearls and rend our garments in terror over a military incursion by one former Soviet republic upon another former Soviet republic. Because Ukraine's borders, they are sacrosanct and inviolable. America's borders, they're racist. American soldiers dying to defend Ukraine's territorial integrity, that is a noble sacrifice on the altar of freedom. American soldiers dying to defend America's territorial integrity, well, that would be a pointless sacrifice on the altar of xenophobia and white supremacy. Just don't ask me what the difference is, says Mr. Fancy Journalist, because I only work here. And we'll leave it there for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you Friday. Have a pleasant tomorrow. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.